The thing I find exciting about the future is that we have absolutely no idea what kind of ecstasy or agony it's going to bring to us. And I'm one of those old-fashioned people who thought, as I started most of my career, that I would address pressing, urgent needs, and so I spent a lot of my life developing immunotherapeutics, vaccines, clean water, and inexpensive diagnostics. But those were the needs of now, and I thought in my investing that I was looking to the future. I now understand that I was extremely old-fashioned, and I support synthetic biology, companies that print DNA, that edit DNA. I now realize that's all passé. However, I have also thought about it, and I wonder if someone who's perfectly edited for 2015 is really going to stand us in good stead for 2115. And I'm not sure we have the wisdom to know what's important and what's redundant as some iconoclastic things happen over the next 100 years. So I'm going to take a completely different tack. And I want to tell you about my art, which is based on two worlds, the micro and the macro. And I don't believe there are many of you who have both an electron microscope and a radio telescope in your kitchen every day. So I'm going to give you some things you could actually hang on your walls. Now, I probably go back further than any of you can imagine into the past. And in the 60s, that's the 1960s, these were turbulent times for me, as they were around the world. I looked down an electron microscope, my own, for the first time. I looked down an uncle's radio telescope. My father had died of hypertension, high blood pressure, and my premature son had died of infantile respiratory distress. I was a young Howard Hughes Medical Institute investigator, and I was looking to settle on a project. So not surprisingly, I picked the blood-air interface in the lungs. And I want to give you a sense of the portal through which I looked into this wonderful world, searching for scientific truth and, in fact, finding beauty. So that's the keyhole through which I want you to peek with me. I had done a large series of experiments that suggested that the enzymes that control the blood pressure was on this inside layer of the smallest blood vessels in the lungs and probably in other parts of the circulation. And it looked extremely thin and suitable for gas exchange, but it really looked boring. I could not imagine that anything as important as blood pressure control could happen on something that looked like a thin black line. But if you use a very exquisitely refined technology called freeze fracturing, you can, in fact, instead of cutting a section that you look at in the electron microscope, you can fracture along a line of weakness within the membrane, and you can actually open it up like reading a book and see the surface over which the entire circulation of humans travels every 6 seconds. And I think you can see these little depressions or caveoli where the actual enzymes that control blood pressure reside. So this was some of the beginnings, a lot of other people's work as well, for what led to the ACE inhibitors, angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors for blood pressure. I can't read it, thank goodness. And I am happy to say that I now take one, and so I find that kind of old-fashioned research very rewarding. I next looked at the other side of the lungs. That air interface was equally dull and uninteresting, except for these amazing big cells that have these whirly black inclusion bodies called lamellar bodies in them. And we now know that they secrete the surfactant that stops our lungs from collapsing when we exhale. But we also know, and a lot of this work was done in San Francisco, that these cells and these organelles, if they are not mature in prematurely born children, those kids don't survive. So it's kind of a sad reminder of the importance of our cell types in our lives and some of their inclusion bodies. Now take a look at those black whirly things. We know that we're about 90% microbes. Most of them just sort of reside in our microbiome, but some of them enter cells. We've accepted this for mitochondria, and we accept that lateral gene transfer can now be integrated into our genomes. And I find it extremely tempting, as I look at these organelles in higher magnification, you can actually see the molecular structure that leads to this lattice or rebar in the lungs that prevents, as I said, the lungs from collapsing. And I can't help thinking that though these are not mitochondria, that you should be thinking, where do they come from? And we'll revisit that. Now I want to be less clinical and just let you enjoy the pictures as art. Most of them include mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, and other organelles. So think of this just as a beautiful piece of fabric. Maybe a beautiful lace dress. Is that a white dog cavorting in the mud? No, I think it's a blue duck splashing in the waves. No, it's super lymphocyte in Lake Tuz in Turkey. And let's keep moving. When you wake up in the morning and you power up through your breathing exercises, you'll be loading your mitochondria for the day, but you could also bathe in the Ganges, all in the comfort of your own home. You can stand on the command center of the cell, the nucleus, with the mitochondria on the Isle of Elba. And probably Napoleon stood there. And we don't see anything of his ego, and I don't think it'll be part of the next 100 years. Imagine standing on Africa and pointing across to Europe, across the Straits of Gibraltar, and you can do that because of your sturdy platform of mitochondria underneath you. And I've forgotten about this one. Great conformity of shapes within the cell, and these are desalination plants in Libya. So I wanted to finish with one of my favorites. This is, I call the tree of life, because it has two of the most essential things of our existence, protein and water. These are ribosomes, and that's a delta in Australia. But I do this art because I think there are some very important messages. If you look at the geography of our political enemies from space, it's just as beautiful as that of our own and of our friends. But there's something very unifying about cells. They've been there as far back as we can remember, and I think they are what will power us through the next 100 years. And I also want to tempt you with thinking they may play host to invaders, microbes and archaea, who might contribute through lateral integration, new genomes for us, and I think that might work better for us over the next 100 years than vertical gene handing on. So I want you to recognize the beauty and the power that's inside all of us, all of you, whether you're young, old, you're in the future, or now, black, white, male, female. We all have very similar looking cells, and I know I've gone down as far in phylogeny as to insects. But I also want you to think about this idea that it's one universe, and maybe some of those microbes and archaea come from different planets, and they may be our hope for the next 100 years. Thank you very much.